The gunshot that killed Benjamin Vance on a cold October morning in 1882 echoed through the Colorado mountains long after his body was laid to rest in the rocky soil outside Black Hawk. His widow, Beatrice Vance, stood at the graveside with her 3 children clinging to her worn calico skirt, wondering how she would survive the coming winter with nothing but 17 cents to her name and a leaking roof over their heads. The mining accident had been quick, the foreman said, as if that should bring her comfort. One moment Benjamin had been working the silver vein deep in the Gregory mine, and the next, loose timber had given way, crushing him beneath tons of rock and shattered dreams. The mining company offered their condolences and $20, which barely covered the pine coffin and the preacher's fee. Now, 2 months later, with December's bitter cold settling into the high country, Beatrice faced the stark reality that Christmas would bring nothing but empty stockings and hungry bellies for 7-year-old Emma, 5-year-old Thomas, and 3-year-old Sarah. Black Hawk, Colorado sat precariously in the mountains at over 8,000 feet, a town that had exploded with the gold and silver strikes of the 60s and now clung to life through sheer stubbornness and the hope that the veins hadn't completely played out. The main street consisted of a general store, 2 saloons, a boarding house, the assay office, and a handful of other establishments that served the miners and the few remaining prospectors who still believed fortune waited in the next shaft. Beatrice had tried everything she could think of to earn money. She had taken in washing, but most of the miners sent their clothes to the Chinese laundry down the street that charged less and returned them faster. She had offered to do mending, but there were 3 other widows in town with the same idea and more experience with fancy stitchwork. She had even swallowed her pride and asked at the saloons if they needed someone to cook or clean, but the owners had looked at her with eyes that suggested other services entirely, and she had fled before the propositions could be spoken aloud. The children were getting thinner. Emma, who had her father's serious brown eyes, had stopped complaining about being hungry, which frightened Beatrice more than the crying had. Thomas had developed a cough that rattled in his small chest, and Sarah, still so young, had taken to sucking her thumb constantly, a habit she had broken months before Benjamin died. They burned what little wood they could gather from the surrounding forest, but the cabin Benjamin had built when they first arrived was poorly constructed, with gaps between the logs that let the wind whistle through like a mournful ghost. On December 20th, Beatrice stood in the general store with her last few coins clutched in her palm, trying to decide between cornmeal and beans. The storekeeper, a portly man named Hutchins who had kind eyes but a business to run, waited patiently while she calculated and recalculated in her head. "The cornmeal," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And perhaps a small piece of salt pork, the cheapest you have." Hutchins wrapped the items in brown paper and took her coins, leaving her with nothing. As she turned to leave, he called out, "Mrs. Vance, wait." He added a small bag of peppermint sticks to her parcel. For the children, early Christmas present, tears burned her eyes. "Mr. Hutchins, I cannot accept charity." "It is not charity, madam. Your husband was a good man who paid his bills on time. Consider it a debt I owe him." His tone brooked no argument, and Beatrice nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The snow was falling heavily as she trudged back to the cabin, the thin shawl she wore doing little to keep out the cold. Her boots, which had been resoled twice already, were more holes than leather, and the wet snow soaked through to her stockings within minutes. The walk from town to their cabin was only half a mile, but it felt like 10 in the bitter wind that swept down from the peaks. Emma was watching the younger children when Beatrice arrived home, her thin face lighting up at the sight of the package. "Did you get something good, Mama?" "Cornmeal for Johnny cakes and a bit of pork for flavoring," Beatrice said, forcing cheerfulness into her voice as she unwrapped the parcels. "And look what Mr. Hutchins gave us for Christmas, peppermint sticks." The children's excitement over the candy pierced her heart. Such a small thing, and they acted as if she had brought home the moon. She broke each stick in half to make them last longer and watched as Emma, Thomas, and Sarah savored the sweet treat, their eyes closed in bliss. That night, after the children were asleep, huddled together under every quilt and blanket she owned, Beatrice sat by the dying fire and faced the truth. Christmas was 5 days away, and she had nothing to give them. No presents, no special meal, no joy to offset the grinding poverty that had become their existence. She had tried to be strong, to have faith that God would provide, but sitting in the cold darkness, she felt that faith wavering like the last ember in the hearth. She must have dozed off in the chair because she woke with a start to the sound of horses outside. Fear shot through her. It was well past midnight, and no one had legitimate business at a widow's cabin at this hour. She grabbed the poker from beside the fireplace, the only weapon she had, and positioned herself between the door and the room where her children slept. The knock, when it came, was firm but not threatening. "Mrs. Vance." "Madam, I do not mean any harm. My horse threw a shoe and I saw your light." Beatrice hesitated. The voice sounded young, polite, but she had learned to be cautious. "It is the middle of the night. Come back in the morning." "Yes, madam, I understand your concern, but it is powerfully cold and my horse cannot make it to town on 3 shoes. I just need to know if there is a blacksmith nearby, or perhaps you have some tools I might borrow. I can pay." The mention of payment made her pause. Against her better judgment, she opened the door a crack, keeping the poker ready. In the moonlight reflecting off the snow, she could see a tall figure in a long duster coat, hat pulled low against the wind. Behind him stood a large bay horse, favoring its front left leg. "The blacksmith is in town, but he will not open until morning," Beatrice said. "We have no tools here that would help you." The man nodded, and she could see the disappointment in the set of his shoulders. "I understand, madam. Thank you for your time. I apologize for disturbing you." He turned to leave, leading his limping horse. Beatrice watched him take 3 steps and thought of the children asleep inside, of Emma's thin face, of Thomas's cough, of Sarah's thumb in her mouth. She thought of the man walking back into the bitter cold, possibly freezing before he reached town. Her husband would not have turned away someone in need, no matter the circumstances. "Wait," she called out, hating herself for the weakness but unable to stop the words. "There is a lean-to barn behind the cabin. You can shelter your horse there, and there is a bit of straw left. You can sleep there as well if you need to. It is out of the wind at least." The man turned back, and even in the dim light she could see his surprise. "Madam, that is very kind of you. I will pay you for the accommodation." $2, she said, naming a sum that seemed enormous but fair for shelter and the risk she was taking. "Done. And thank you, Mrs. Vance. Truly." She watched as he led his horse around back, then barred the door and returned to her chair by the fire, the poker across her lap. She did not sleep the rest of the night, listening for any sound that might indicate the stranger was more than he seemed. But all she heard was the wind, and once, the low nicker of the horse settling into the barn. Dawn came gray and cold. Beatrice made a thin porridge from the last of their oats and was ladling it into bowls for the children when a knock came at the door. She looked through the gap in the logs and saw the stranger standing in the early light, and for the first time, she got a clear look at him. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that needed a trim, and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. His eyes were a striking gray-blue, like the sky before a storm, and there was an openness to his face that suggested honesty. He was tall and lean, with the rangy build of someone who spent their life outdoors. His clothes, though dusty from travel, were of good quality, the kind a successful rancher or cattle hand might wear. She opened the door. "Good morning." "Morning, madam." He removed his hat, revealing more of his face. "I wanted to thank you again for your kindness last night and to pay you for the shelter." He held out $3 silver. "We agreed on two," Beatrice said, not reaching for the money. "The third is for your trouble and your trust." Not many would open their door to a stranger. He smiled, and it transformed his face from merely pleasant to genuinely handsome. "I am Preston Vaughn, madam. I work as a ranch foreman down near Denver, and I am traveling to visit my sister in Central City for Christmas." "Beatrice Vance," she said, taking the money because she needed it too desperately to refuse. "These are my children, Emma, Thomas, and Sarah." Preston looked past her to where the three children stood in their nightshirts, staring at him with wide eyes. His expression softened. "Those are fine-looking children, Mrs. Vance. You must be very proud." Something in the way he said it, without any pity or judgment, made Beatrice's throat tighten. "Would you like some breakfast before you go? It is only porridge, but you are welcome to share." Preston hesitated, and she saw him glance at the thin meal in the pot, obviously calculating that there was barely enough for the four of them already. "That is kind, but I have supplies in my saddlebags. However, if you would permit me, I would be honored to contribute to the meal. I have bacon and coffee beans, and I hate to let them go to waste on the trail." It was a polite fiction, and they both knew it, but Beatrice found herself nodding. That would be acceptable. Preston retrieved his saddlebags and produced a wealth that seemed impossible. Thick slices of bacon, fresh coffee beans, a small sack of sugar, and even a jar of preserved peaches. "My sister gave me too much for the journey," he explained, though his eyes were kind rather than condescending. "I could not possibly use it all." The children watched in amazement as Beatrice fried the bacon in her only pan and made real coffee, a luxury they had not enjoyed in weeks. The smell filled the cabin, rich and savory, and Thomas actually giggled, the first happy sound she had heard from him in days. They sat around the rough-hewn table Benjamin had made, and Preston entertained the children with stories of the ranch where he worked, of cattle drives and wild horses, and the time a skunk had gotten into the bunkhouse. He had an easy way with them, treating Emma's serious questions with respect and laughing at Thomas's excitement. Sarah, shy at first, crept closer and closer until she was practically sitting on Preston's boot, staring up at him with adoring eyes. After breakfast, Preston helped Beatrice clear the dishes, working as comfortably in the kitchen as he likely did in the saddle. "Your husband must be a miner working early shift?" he asked conversationally. The question hung in the air, innocent and devastating. "My husband passed in October, Mr. Vaughn. A mining accident." Preston's hands stilled in the dishwater. "Mrs. Vance, I am so sorry. I should not have presumed." He looked around the cabin, seeing now what he had missed before. The worn clothing hanging on pegs, the near-empty shelves, the cold that penetrated despite the fire. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked like determination. "Madam, may I speak plainly?" "I suppose so. I can see you are in difficult circumstances." "There is no shame in it. These are hard times, especially for a woman alone with children. I would like to help if you will allow it." Pride warred with desperation in Beatrice's chest. "Mr. Vaughn, I cannot accept charity." "Then do not think of it as charity. Think of it as Christian kindness, one human being to another. or think of it as payment for services rendered. I need my horse reshod, and that will take the morning. Perhaps I could hire you to do my washing, mend my spare shirt, and provide a midday meal. I would pay $5 for such services. $5. It was far more than the work was worth, and they both knew it. Beatrice looked at her children, at Emma's two thin arms, at Thomas's pale face, at Sarah's wide eyes. She looked at the empty shelves and the cold fireplace and the roof that leaked when it rained. $7, and you stay for supper as well. And I will not pretend that you are not being generous far beyond what the work deserves. But I will thank you for it, Mr. Vaughn, because my pride cannot feed my children. Respect flickered in Preston's eyes. $7 then, Mrs. Vance, and you may call me Preston if you are comfortable doing so. Beatrice, she said quietly, or Bea as my friends call me. Preston smiled. Bea it is then. He rode into town with the children bundled on his horse, Emma sitting in front of him and Thomas behind, while Sarah rode in his arms like a queen on a throne. Beatrice watched them go, this stranger who had appeared out of a winter night and somehow made the morning seem less bleak. She did not let herself hope, not really, but as she went about preparing to do his washing, she found herself humming for the first time in months. Preston returned 2 hours later with his horse newly shod and his saddlebags significantly lighter. I passed the general store, he explained, unpacking potatoes, carrots, onions, a good-sized ham hock, flour, sugar, real butter, and eggs. I thought perhaps a stew for supper, and maybe biscuits if you have the time. I will pay extra for the cooking, of course. Beatrice did not argue this time. She took the supplies and set to work, and if her hands trembled slightly as she handled food she had not been able to afford in weeks, Preston pretended not to notice. He spent the afternoon making himself useful. He found the gaps in the cabin walls and stuffed them with moss and mud to keep out the wind. He repaired the broken step on the front porch and rehung the door so it closed properly. He climbed onto the roof and patched the worst of the leaks with spare shingles he somehow produced from his seemingly endless saddlebags. The children followed him everywhere, even Thomas, who seemed to have more energy after the morning's good meal. Beatrice watched him from the window as she worked, this Preston Vaughn who had stumbled into their lives by accident. He was good with the children, patient with Thomas's constant questions, and gentle when Sarah demanded to be picked up. He treated Emma like a young lady, asking her opinion on the best way to arrange the woodpile and thanking her gravely for her advice. By evening, the cabin was warmer and tighter than it had been since they moved in. The stew bubbled on the stove, filling the space with the rich smell of meat and vegetables, and Beatrice's biscuits were rising nicely in the oven. Preston had chopped enough wood to last them a week and stacked it neatly under the eave where it would stay dry. They ate supper together, and it felt almost like being a family again. Preston told more stories, and the children laughed, and Beatrice found herself smiling in a way that did not feel forced or false. When the meal was done and the dishes washed, Preston prepared to leave. "Thank you for everything, Bea," he said, handing her $10 instead of the $7 they had agreed upon. "The work and the company were worth far more than this. Preston, this is too much. Consider the extra as payment for the pleasure of spending a day with your wonderful children," he said firmly. "I leave for Central City at dawn, and I cannot take the money with me." It was another polite fiction, but Beatrice was too grateful to argue. "Will you be coming back this way after Christmas?" Something flickered in Preston's eyes, something warm and hopeful. "I had not planned on it, but I find myself thinking it might be a good idea. The trail through Black Hawk is scenic after all." "Then perhaps you might stop for a meal on your return journey, to repay your kindness." "I would like that very much, B." He tipped his hat to her and ruffled the children's hair, and then he was gone, riding off into the darkness toward the boarding house in town. Beatrice stood in the doorway, watching until his silhouette disappeared, and tried not to think about how empty the cabin felt without him. The $10 was a fortune. The next morning, Beatrice walked into town with her head high and purchased flour, sugar, cornmeal, beans, salt pork, coffee, and even a small chicken for Christmas dinner. She paid Mr. Hutchins in full and still had money left over. The children had new stockings and mittens, and she bought the materials to make them each a small toy. Emma would get a corn husk doll, Thomas a wooden horse, and Sarah a soft cloth ball, but she could not stop thinking about Preston. About his kind eyes and gentle hands, about the way he had treated her children as if they mattered, about how safe she had felt with him nearby. She told herself not to be foolish. He was young and handsome and clearly successful. He was probably just being kind to a widow in need. He had his own life, his own plans. Christmas Eve arrived and Beatrice prepared a modest but adequate meal for her children. They had food in the pantry, a warm cabin, and she had even managed to buy a few small candies for their stockings. It was more than she had dared hope for a week ago, and she thanked God for the blessing of Preston Vaughn's thrown horseshoe. The children were just settling into bed when she heard horses outside. Her heart leaped into her throat. Preston had said he would stop on his return journey, but she had not expected him on Christmas Eve. She smoothed her hair and checked her reflection in the window, then laughed at herself for acting like a schoolgirl. But when she opened the door, she found Preston standing there with his arms full of packages, his face split by a huge grin. "Merry Christmas Eve, B. Preston, I thought you were going to your sister's." "I did. I had a nice visit, and now I am here." He stomped the snow off his boots. "May I come in?" Of course, of course." She stepped back, flustered and pleased and confused all at once. The children came running, their shyness from before completely forgotten. Mr. Preston, you came back." "I did indeed." He set the packages down and shed his coat and hat. "I brought some things for Christmas, if your mother does not mind." Beatrice started to protest, but the joy on her children's faces stopped the words. "That is very kind of you. I hoped I might spend Christmas with you all if the invitation is still open." My sister understood. She said family is important, but so is following your heart. His eyes met Beatrice's, and there was something in their depths that made her pulse quicken. The children were already tearing into the packages, squealing with delight. For Emma, there was a beautiful rag doll with a painted face and real yarn hair. For Thomas, a carved wooden train with moving wheels. For Sarah, a soft stuffed rabbit with button eyes. There were oranges, a luxury in the mountains in winter, and peppermint sticks and a bag of walnuts. "Preston, this is too much," Beatrice whispered, watching her children play with their treasures. "I have one more thing," Preston said quietly. He handed her a package wrapped in brown paper. "For you." Inside was a beautiful woolen shawl in deep blue, warm and soft and of far better quality than anything she had ever owned. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. "Preston, I cannot accept this. Please do. I saw it in a shop in Denver before I left, and I could not stop thinking about you standing in the snow with that thin wrap, trying to be brave for your children." He reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "You deserve something beautiful, B. You deserve more than you have received from life." She looked up at him, at this man who had appeared like an answer to an unspoken prayer, and saw in his eyes what she had been afraid to hope for. "Why are you really here, Preston?" "Because I could not stop thinking about you. Because I rode to Central City and spent 2 days with my sister. But all I wanted was to be back in a cold cabin in Black Hawk, listening to your children laugh and watching you smile. Because when my horse threw that shoe, I thought it was bad luck, but now I think it might have been the best thing that ever happened to me." He took her hands in his touch warm and sure. "I know it has only been a few days. I know you are in mourning, and I respect that. But I also know what I feel, and I did not want to let Christmas pass without telling you." Beatrice's heart hammered in her chest. "Preston, I have nothing to offer you. I am a widow with 3 children and no prospects. You could have anyone." "I do not want anyone, I want you." He squeezed her hands gently. "I have a good job, B. I make $75 a month as foreman, and I have money saved. I own land near Denver, 200 acres I bought with my earnings. I have been building a house there, a real house with 4 bedrooms and a proper kitchen. I always thought I would fill it someday, but I could never picture with whom. Until now." "You are talking about marriage." Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Eventually, yes, if you will have me, if you think you could learn to love me." He smiled, a bit uncertain now. "I am not asking you to decide tonight. I know I am rushing things. But I wanted you to know my intentions are honorable. I want to court you properly, B. I want to help you and your children. And when enough time has passed that it is proper, I want to marry you and take you all home to that house I have been building." Beatrice looked into his eyes and saw her future there. Saw safety and warmth and love. Saw her children growing up with a good man to guide them. Saw herself waking beside someone who looked at her as if she hung the moon. It was too soon, far too soon, but her heart knew what it wanted. "Benjamin would have liked you," she said softly. "He was a good man, but he was not practical. He dreamed big and planned small. But he loved us, and he would want us to be safe and happy." "I will honor his memory," Preston promised. "I will never try to replace him in your children's hearts, but I will love you all with everything I have. I would like that very much." She smiled through her tears. "I would like to be courted by you, Preston Vaughn." He pulled her close, not kissing her but holding her against his chest, and she felt his heart beating strong and steady beneath her cheek. Behind them, the children played with their new toys, warm and fed and happy. The fire crackled in the hearth, and outside, snow began to fall, soft and white, covering the mountain in a blanket of Christmas peace. Christmas Day dawned bright and cold. Preston had slept in the barn again, insisting on propriety, but he was at the door at sunrise with a basket of fresh biscuits from the boarding house and a jar of honey. They ate breakfast together, and then Preston produced a small Bible from his saddlebag. "Would you permit me to read the Christmas story?" he asked. "My mother always read it to us on Christmas morning." They gathered around the fire, the children sitting at Preston's feet while Beatrice sat in the chair beside him. His voice was strong and clear as he read about Mary and Joseph, about the baby born in a manger, about shepherds and angels and a star in the east. When he finished, he led them in a prayer of thanksgiving, and Beatrice felt a peace settle over her that she had not known in months. They spent the day together, playing simple games and telling stories. Preston was teaching Thomas how to whittle when Emma approached him, her face serious. "Mr. Preston, are you going to be our new papa?" The question hung in the air. Preston set down his knife and turned to face the little girl. "Would you like that, Emma?" She considered this carefully, as was her way. "I miss my papa very much. I do not want to forget him." "You will never forget him," Preston said gently. "He was your papa and he loved you. Nothing will ever change that. But if your mama agrees, I would like to be someone who loves you too. Not to replace your papa, but to be another person who cares for you and protects you and helps you grow up strong and good." Emma studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I think that would be acceptable." Preston laughed, a warm, rich sound. "I am honored by your acceptance, Miss Emma." Thomas abandoned his whittling and climbed onto Preston's lap. "Will we live on your ranch? Will there be horses?" "Yes and yes," Preston confirmed. "Lots of horses and cattle. And room to run and play." "What about Mama?" Thomas asked, his young face worried. "Will she have to work so hard?" "Your Mama will be able to rest," Preston promised. "I will take care of all of you." Sarah toddled over and held up her arms. Preston lifted her onto his other knee, and she snuggled against his chest with a contented sigh. Beatrice watched the scene, her throat tight with emotion. Her children, who had been so sad and frightened, were blooming under Preston's attention like flowers in spring rain. That evening, after the children were asleep, Preston and Beatrice sat by the fire, talking quietly. He told her about his life, about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about how he had come west after his parents died, looking for opportunity. He had worked as a ranch hand, learning everything about horses and cattle and the business of ranching. His skill and work ethic had earned him the position of foreman, and his savings had purchased the land where he planned to build his future. "I want to do it right," he said, holding her hand in the firelight. "I know we feel something strong, but I want to give you time to grieve properly. I want to court you so the town knows my intentions are honorable. I want your children to have time to know me and trust me." "How long were you thinking?" Beatrice asked. 6 months. A year, whatever you need." Beatrice thought about this. 6 months would put them in June, a full 8 months after Benjamin's death. It would be respectable, just barely, but respectable. 6 months, she said. "But Preston, how can we court properly with you in Denver and me here?" Preston smiled. "I have been thinking about that. I could move to Black Hawk. There is a stable in town that needs a manager. The owner approached me this morning. It would not pay as well as my current position, but it would be enough to support myself and help you until we marry. Then we could move to Denver together as a family. You would give up your position as foreman for me. I would give up anything for you. The foreman job will be there when I am ready to go back, or I will find another. But you and your children need someone now, not 6 months from now, and I find I cannot bear the thought of leaving you here alone." Beatrice felt something warm and bright unfold in her chest. "Then yes, stay. Help us. Court me properly. And in 6 months, if we still feel as we do now, I will marry you, Preston Vaughn." He leaned forward and kissed her forehead, a gentle, chaste kiss that somehow felt more intimate than anything she had experienced before. "You have made me the happiest man in Colorado, B. Vance." The next morning, Preston rode to Denver to resign his position and collect his belongings. He was gone for 3 days, and Beatrice was startled by how much she missed him, how empty the cabin felt without his presence. The children asked about him constantly, and she found herself watching the road, waiting for his return. When he finally came back, riding a sturdy roan horse and leading a pack mule loaded with his possessions, her heart leaped with joy. He had brought gifts for all of them. A warm winter coat for Beatrice, made of good wool with a fur collar. New boots for the children, properly sized and sturdy. Books, 3 of them, one of fairy tales for Emma, one of adventure stories for Thomas, and one of Mother Goose rhymes for Sarah. "I may have gotten a bit carried away at the shops," Preston admitted, looking slightly sheepish. "But I kept thinking of things you might need or enjoy." Preston took the job managing the stable, and true to his word, he courted Beatrice properly. He came to Sunday services with them, sitting in the pew beside her and ignoring the whispers and stares. He took them on sleigh rides when the snow was good, bundling the children in warm blankets and making them laugh with his stories. He fixed everything in the cabin that needed fixing and chopped enough wood to last through the winter. He never stayed past dark, always careful of Beatrice's reputation. He never touched her beyond holding her hand or placing a gentle hand at her back. But his eyes promised more, and Beatrice found herself counting down the days until their wedding. The town gossips had plenty to say about the widow who had found herself a young, handsome beau so soon after her husband's death. Beatrice heard the whispers at church, saw the disapproving looks from some of the older women. But she also saw the envy in the eyes of the unmarried girls and the respect in the faces of the men who knew Preston's character. "Let them talk," Preston said when she expressed her concern. "They do not know what you have been through. They do not know that I found you trying to survive on nothing but courage and love for your children. Anyone who judges you is not worth your worry." January turned to February, and the days grew slightly longer. Preston taught Thomas to ride on one of the gentle horses from the stable, and the boy's cough finally faded away under the influence of regular meals and a warm house. Emma learned to read simple words from the fairy tale book, and Sarah grew rosy-cheeked and healthy. Beatrice herself changed. The lines of worry around her eyes softened. She gained back the weight she had lost, and color returned to her cheeks. She laughed more easily and smiled without effort. Preston brought that out in her, made her feel young and beautiful and worthy of love. In March, Preston asked her formally to marry him, going down on one knee in her tiny kitchen while the children watched with wide eyes. He produced a ring, simple but lovely, a gold band with a small diamond that caught the light. "Beatrice Vance, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Will you let me love you and your children for the rest of my life?" "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Preston, I will marry you." The children cheered, and Emma actually hugged Preston, something she had been too shy to do before. Thomas wanted to know if he could call Preston Papa, and Preston assured him that nothing would make him happier. Sarah, understanding only that everyone was happy, clapped her hands and demanded to be picked up and spun around. They set the wedding date for June 15th, 8 months after Benjamin's death. It was respectable timing, and the banns were posted at the church. Preston commissioned a dressmaker in Central City to make Beatrice a new dress, pale blue silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, more beautiful than anything she had ever owned. As the wedding approached, Preston made trips to Denver to prepare the house for his new family. He hired a woman from town to come help clean and set up the bedrooms. He bought furniture, a real dining table with matching chairs, proper beds for everyone, a sofa for the parlor. He wanted everything to be perfect for when he brought his bride home. The night before the wedding, Preston came to supper as he always did. After the children were in bed, he and Beatrice sat on the porch in the gathering dusk, holding hands and talking about their future. "Are you nervous?" Preston asked. "A little," Beatrice admitted. "Not about marrying you. I know that is right, but about leaving Black Hawk, about starting over in a new place." "You will love the ranch," Preston promised. "The house sits on a hill overlooking a valley. You can see the mountains in the distance, and there is a creek that runs through the property. I have already hired a woman from the neighboring ranch to help with the housework until you are settled, and the children will have room to run and explore. It sounds wonderful." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Preston, I need to say something, anything. I want you to know that I care for you deeply. What I feel is real, not just gratitude or convenience. You have become so important to me, to all of us. I think I am falling in love with you." Preston turned to face her, his hand gentle on her cheek. "I fell in love with you the morning I saw you standing in that cold cabin, trying to feed your children on nothing but hope and determination. Every day since then, I have loved you more. I cannot wait to make you my wife." He kissed her then, a real kiss, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was Beatrice's first kiss since Benjamin died, and she felt a pang of guilt that faded almost immediately. Benjamin would want her to be happy. He would want his children to be cared for. And what she felt for Preston was different from what she had felt for Benjamin, but no less real. The wedding took place at noon in the small church in Black Hawk. Emma, Thomas, and Sarah stood with their mother, dressed in new clothes Preston had commissioned. Emma wore a pink dress with ribbons, Thomas a little suit with a proper tie, and Sarah a white dress with lace that made her look like an angel. Preston stood at the altar in a new black suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven. His sister had come from Central City with her husband, and the stable owner and his wife served as witnesses. A handful of people from town filled the pews, some out of genuine goodwill and others out of curiosity. Beatrice walked down the aisle on Emma's arm, her daughter taking the role seriously, her face solemn with the importance of the task. When Beatrice reached the altar and Preston took her hand, she saw tears in his eyes. The preacher read the familiar words, and they made their vows before God and witnesses. Preston's voice was strong and sure as he promised to love, honor, and cherish. Beatrice's voice trembled slightly, overwhelmed by emotion, but her words were clear. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. The boarding house provided a wedding dinner, and there was cake, a luxury that made the children's eyes grow wide. Preston danced with Beatrice, holding her close and whispering promises for their future. He danced with Emma, making her laugh by pretending to let her lead. He even danced with Sarah, holding the toddler on his hip while she giggled and grabbed at his nose. As the sun began to set, they loaded into the wagon Preston had borrowed for the journey. Their few possessions were already packed, ready to begin their new life. The children were excited but tired, settling into the wagon bed on blankets while Preston helped Beatrice onto the bench seat. "Ready?" he asked, taking up the reins. "Ready," Beatrice confirmed, her hand in his. They left Black Hawk as the first stars appeared, heading toward Denver and the ranch that would be their new home. The children fell asleep quickly, lulled by the motion of the wagon. Beatrice leaned against Preston's shoulder, watching the road unfold before them in the moonlight. "Happy?" Preston asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again," Beatrice answered truthfully. "You saved us, Preston. You gave us back our lives." "You saved me too," Preston said. "I was just going through the motions, working and saving and building, but I did not have a reason for any of it. You gave me a purpose. You gave me a family. You gave me love." They reached the ranch near midnight. Preston carried Sarah, who barely stirred, while Emma and Thomas walked sleepily beside Beatrice. The house rose before them in the darkness, larger than Beatrice had imagined, welcoming and solid. Inside, lamps had been lit by the hired woman, casting warm light through the windows. Preston gave Beatrice a quick tour, showing her the kitchen with its big stove and pump right at the sink, the parlor with its comfortable furniture, and the bedrooms upstairs. Emma and Sarah would share one room, decorated in cheerful yellow. Thomas would have his own room, with walls painted blue and a shelf already waiting for his treasures. And the master bedroom, the largest, with a big four-poster bed and windows overlooking the valley. They put the children to bed, tucking them in with kisses. Then Preston led Beatrice back to their bedroom, suddenly nervous. This would be their wedding night, the beginning of their marriage in truth, and he wanted it to be perfect. "B," he said quietly, "if you need time, if this is too soon, I understand. I can sleep in one of the other rooms tonight." Beatrice looked at this good man, this answer to her prayers, and shook her head. "I am your wife, Preston, and I want to be your wife in every way." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and she responded with a passion that surprised them both. The years of hardship and fear fell away as they came together, finding in each other comfort and joy and the promise of better days ahead. Preston was gentle and patient, mindful that she had been with only one man before, and Beatrice gave herself to him without reservation, trusting him completely. Afterward, they lay in the darkness, tangled together, hearts still racing. Preston stroked her hair, marveling that she was really his, that this beautiful, brave woman had agreed to spend her life with him. "I love you," Beatrice whispered. "I truly love you, Preston. I love you too, Bea. I always will." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, beginning their new life together under the Colorado stars. The weeks that followed were a time of adjustment and discovery. Beatrice learned the rhythms of the ranch, the daily routines and chores. The hired woman, Mrs. Donnelly, taught her how to manage the big kitchen and helped her understand the work involved in keeping the house running. But Mrs. Donnelly also became a friend, someone Beatrice could talk to and rely on. The children thrived. Thomas spent every waking moment with Preston when he could, learning about horses and cattle and ranch work. Emma discovered a love of cooking and helped Beatrice and Mrs. Donnelly prepare meals. Sarah explored every inch of the house and yard, her laughter echoing through the rooms. Preston proved to be exactly the man Beatrice had believed him to be, kind and steady and loving. He worked hard, managing the ranch with the skill that had made him a successful foreman. But he also made time for his new family, eating dinner with them every night, playing with the children before bed, and spending quiet evenings with Beatrice, talking about their day and making plans for the future. In August, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with joy and a touch of fear. She had not expected this, had not thought about having more children. But as she placed a hand on her still flat stomach, she felt a rush of love for the child growing inside her, Preston's child, a physical expression of their love. She told him that night after the children were in bed. Preston's face went through a series of expressions: shock, wonder, and finally pure joy. He dropped to his knees and pressed his face against her stomach, his arms around her waist. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, running her fingers through his hair. Happy does not begin to cover it. He looked up at her, his eyes bright with tears. "Bea, you have given me everything. A wife I adore, 3 wonderful children, and now a baby of our own. I am the most blessed man alive." They told the children at breakfast the next morning. Emma was thrilled at the prospect of a baby to help care for. Thomas seemed less interested but announced that if it was a boy, he would teach him to ride. Sarah did not entirely understand but was excited because everyone else was. The pregnancy was easier than Beatrice's previous ones had been, perhaps because she was not worn down by poverty and stress. She had good food, a comfortable home, and a husband who doted on her. Preston treated her like she was made of glass, constantly worried that she was working too hard or needed to rest. "Preston, I am pregnant, not ill," Beatrice finally said in exasperation when he tried to stop her from kneading bread dough. "I have done this 3 times before." "I know, but I want to take care of you. Let me take care of you." His earnestness melted her irritation. "You do take care of me, every single day, but I also need to feel useful, to have purpose. Cooking and caring for our home gives me that." They compromised. Beatrice continued to do the work she enjoyed, but accepted help with the heavier chores. Mrs. Donnelly took over the laundry and the heavy cleaning. Preston hired another hand to help with the outside work so he could spend more time close to the house, where he could keep an eye on Beatrice. Autumn came, turning the aspens gold and the air crisp. Beatrice's belly grew round, and she felt the baby move, strong kicks that made Preston laugh with delight when he placed his hand on her stomach. They prepared the nursery, painting it a soft green and filling it with a cradle Preston had made himself, carved with intricate designs of horses and stars. In November, as the first snow began to fall, the children asked if Preston was going to play Santa Claus again this year. "Of course," Preston said. "We will have a wonderful Christmas, the 5 of us. Well, nearly 6 of us." He patted Beatrice's belly. "It is hard to believe it has only been a year," Beatrice said that night as they sat by the fire. "Last Christmas, I thought we would starve. I had no money, no hope, no idea how we would survive. And then you appeared." "A throne horseshoe," Preston mused. "Such a small thing, but it changed everything. You changed everything. You played Santa Claus for children you did not know, and you gave us a future. You gave us love." "I got far more than I gave," Preston argued. "I got you." They kissed, a slow, sweet kiss that promised forever. Christmas that year was magical. Preston cut down a small pine tree and they decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper stars the children made. There were presents for everyone, thoughtful gifts that showed how well Preston knew his family. For Emma, a beautiful journal with a lock and key. For Thomas, a bridle of his very own for the pony Preston had been training for him. For Sarah, a porcelain doll with a complete wardrobe. For Beatrice, Preston had commissioned a portrait of the 5 of them, painted from a photograph they had taken in the fall. It showed them standing in front of the house, Preston and Beatrice in the center, the children arranged around them, all smiling. It captured a moment of perfect happiness, and Beatrice cried when she unwrapped it. "So we never forget where we have been and how far we have come," Preston said, holding her close. "And so our child will see the family they are being born into." On Christmas night, after the children were in bed, Preston and Beatrice sat by the tree, her head on his shoulder, his hand on her belly where their child rested. "What do you think it will be?" Beatrice asked. "A boy or a girl, I do not care, as long as you are both healthy." He kissed the top of her head. "Though a little girl with your eyes would be wonderful, or a boy with your stubbornness and strength." "I was not stubborn, I was desperate. You were magnificent. You kept your children alive through sheer force of will. You never gave up, never stopped fighting." "That is not desperation, Bea. That is courage. I had to. They were depending on me. And now we all depend on each other. That is what family means." The baby came in March, during a late snowstorm that blanketed the ranch in white. The labor was hard, and Preston paced the hallway outside their bedroom, terrified and helpless. Mrs. Donnelly and the midwife she had brought from town worked with Beatrice, encouraging her and supporting her through the pain. Finally, after hours that felt like days, the baby's cry split the air. Preston burst into the room to find Beatrice exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "A boy," she said softly. "We have a son, Preston." Preston approached slowly, almost reverently. The baby was tiny, with a shock of dark hair and a red, scrunched face. He was perfect. "May I?" Preston asked, holding out his hands. Beatrice placed the baby in his arms, and Preston felt his heart expand to a size he had not known was possible. This was his son, his blood, a life he had helped create with the woman he loved. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your papa. And I promise I will love you and protect you every single day of your life." The baby opened his eyes, dark blue and unfocused, and seemed to look at Preston. Then his tiny hand wrapped around Preston's finger, holding on with surprising strength. "He knows you," Beatrice said, her eyes wet with happy tears. They named him Benjamin Preston Vaughn, honoring both the father who had come before and the father who would raise him. Emma, Thomas, and Sarah adored their new brother. taking turns holding him carefully and arguing over who would help take care of him. The years that followed were good ones, full of love and laughter and hard work. The ranch prospered under Preston's management. They added more cattle, improved the breeds, and expanded their operation. Money was never plentiful, but it was adequate, and more importantly, it was secure. Beatrice never again had to choose between cornmeal and beans, never had to watch her children go hungry. Benjamin, called Benji by the family, grew into a happy, energetic little boy who followed Preston everywhere. Emma grew into a beautiful young woman, serious and kind, who eventually married the son of a neighboring rancher. Thomas became a skilled horseman and took over much of the day-to-day work of the ranch as he got older. Sarah remained the baby of the family even after Benji's birth, cheerful and affectionate, the light of everyone's life. 2 years after Benji, Beatrice gave birth to another child, a daughter they named Grace. Preston cried when he held her, this second child of his own flesh, this little girl who looked exactly like her mother. The house rang with noise and chaos and joy, exactly as Preston had always imagined it would. Beatrice sometimes thought about that Christmas Eve when Preston had knocked on her door, a stranger seeking help for his horse. She thought about how close she had come to turning him away, about how different her life would have been if she had. The children would probably have survived the winter, but barely, and the next winter might have been too much. They would have lived in poverty and fear, scraping by without hope of anything better. Instead, they had this: a warm home, plenty of food, children who were healthy and happy, and a love that grew stronger every year. Preston had played Santa Claus that Christmas, bringing gifts and hope and a future Beatrice had not dared to imagine. But he had brought something even more precious than that. He had brought himself, his love, his unwavering commitment to her and her children. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. The children's laughter drifted from inside the house, where Emma was supervising Benji and Grace while Thomas and Sarah played a game of checkers. "About how much I love you," Beatrice said simply. "About how you saved my life." "You saved mine too," Preston reminded her as he always did. "I was just existing before I met you. Now I am living. Do you ever regret it? Taking on a widow with 3 children, you could have had an easier life." Preston turned to face her, his expression serious. "B, you are my life. You and Emma and Thomas and Sarah and Benji and Grace. Everything I do, everything I am, is because of you all. I wake up every morning grateful for that thrown horseshoe, grateful for your kindness in opening your door to a stranger, grateful for every single day I get to spend as your husband. Even when Grace is screaming at 2 in the morning and Benji has tracked mud through the kitchen and Thomas has left the gate open and the cattle get out," Preston laughed. "Especially then. That is real life, B. That is family. The mess and the chaos and the frustration and the love all tangled together. I would not trade a single moment of it." They kissed as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Behind them, through the window, they could see their children, safe and happy and loved. This was what Preston had built when he played Santa Claus that Christmas. Not just presents and food for a desperate widow, but a family, a life, a future full of hope and joy. Years passed in the steady rhythm of ranch life. There were good years and hard years, seasons of plenty and seasons of struggle. But through it all, Preston and Beatrice faced everything together, their love the foundation that kept their family strong. Emma married at 19 and gave them their first grandchild, a boy she named Preston, after the man she considered her real father. Thomas took over more of the ranch operation, working side by side with Preston, and eventually married a schoolteacher from Denver who brought culture and learning to the family gatherings. Sarah shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to be a teacher herself and went to college in Denver, returning home every summer and eventually settling in a nearby town, where she taught and fell in love with the town doctor. Benji grew up to be the spitting image of his father, tall and strong with the same kind eyes and gentle manner. He inherited Preston's way with horses and became known throughout Colorado as one of the best horse trainers around. Grace, the baby, was spoiled by everyone but somehow remained humble and sweet. She had her mother's strength and her father's optimism, and she brought joy wherever she went. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Preston took Beatrice back to Black Hawk. The town had changed, shrinking as the mines played out and people moved on to better opportunities. The cabin where they had met was still standing, abandoned and weathered, more gaps between the logs than wood. "I almost died in that cabin," Beatrice said softly, standing in front of it. "Not physically, maybe, but inside. I was giving up, Preston. If you had not come when you did, I do not know what would have happened to us. But I did come, and you did not give up, and look at what we built together." He pulled her close. 20 years, B. 20 years of love and life and family, and I want 20 more, and 20 after that. We will be very old, Beatrice pointed out, laughing. Then we will be old together. I cannot imagine anything better. They returned to the ranch that evening to find their children and grandchildren gathered for a surprise party. The house was full of noise and love, 3 generations celebrating the marriage that had started with a thrown horseshoe and a desperate widow's kindness. As Beatrice looked around at her family, at the children and grandchildren Preston had given her, at the life they had built together, she felt overwhelming gratitude. She had been broken, lost, hopeless. And then Preston had appeared like an answer to prayer, playing Santa Claus for children he did not know, staying because he fell in love, building a life with her that surpassed anything she could have dreamed. Late that night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Preston and Beatrice sat in their room, looking at the portrait he had given her that first Christmas. 5 people, now surrounded by the family they had become. Emma with her husband and children, Thomas with his wife, Sarah with her doctor. Benji still unmarried but happy. Grace still at home but preparing to spread her wings. "We did good," Preston said quietly. "We did very good," Beatrice agreed. "You played Santa Claus and you stayed for life and you gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Preston corrected. "That is what love does." They went to bed that night as they had every night for 20 years, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the life they shared. Outside, the Colorado stars shone bright and clear, the same stars that had witnessed a desperate widow's prayer and a cowboy's thrown horseshoe, the beginning of a love story that would last a lifetime. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Preston's hair turned gray at the temples, then silver and finally white. Beatrice's hands, once so smooth, became worn with work and time. But their love never faded, never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deeper, richer with each passing year. They celebrated their 25th anniversary, their 30th, their 35th. The ranch passed primarily to Benji and Thomas, who ran it together while Preston stepped back, content to advise and enjoy his grandchildren. There were eventually 15 grandchildren, a houseful whenever everyone came to visit, and the noise and chaos were exactly what Preston and Beatrice loved. On their 40th anniversary, Preston arranged a special surprise. He had commissioned a new portrait, this one showing their entire family, children and grandchildren all gathered together. It took up most of one wall in the parlor, a testament to what they had built together. 40 years, Beatrice marveled, looking at the portrait. 40 years since you knocked on my door on Christmas Eve. Best decision I ever made, Preston said. Well, after deciding to come back on Christmas Day, and deciding to stay in Black Hawk, and deciding to court you, and deciding to marry you, I guess I made a lot of good decisions that year. We both did, Beatrice said. She took his hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after 40 years of practice. I love you, Preston Vaughn. I have loved you since that first Christmas, and I will love you until my last breath. And I love you, Beatrice Vaughn. You made my life worth living. You gave me purpose and meaning and joy. You were the best Christmas present I ever received. They kissed, tender and sweet, two people who had loved each other through 4 decades of life. Their story had started with desperation and kindness, with a widow who had no money for her children and a cowboy who played Santa Claus. But it had become so much more than that. It had become a love that weathered every storm, a family that supported each other through everything, and a legacy that would continue for generations. As they stood together in the parlor of the house Preston had built all those years ago, surrounded by evidence of the life they had created, they knew that their story was complete. Not ending because they still had years ahead of them, but complete in the sense that they had accomplished what they set out to do. They had built a family. They had created a home. They had loved each other with everything they had. And it all started because a horse threw a shoe on a cold December night, and a desperate widow decided to open her door to a stranger. Sometimes the best gifts come in the most unexpected packages, and sometimes playing Santa Claus leads to finding the love of your life and staying forever. Preston and Beatrice lived many more years together, each one precious, each one a gift. They saw their grandchildren grow up and have children of their own. They saw the ranch continue to prosper. They saw their love story become family legend, told and retold at gatherings, an example of how kindness and love can change everything. When Preston finally passed away at the age of 87, surrounded by his family, his last words were to Beatrice. Thank you for opening your door that night. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for 45 years of happiness. Beatrice held his hand and whispered back, thank you for playing Santa Claus. Thank you for staying. Thank you for giving me a life worth living. She followed him 3 years later. Her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered around her bed. Her last words were about Preston, about how she could see him waiting for her, about how their love had been the greatest adventure of her life. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their shared headstone reading simply, Preston and Beatrice Vaughn. He played Santa Claus and stayed for life. She opened her door and her heart. Together they built a legacy of love. And on quiet Colorado nights, when the stars shine bright and the wind whispers through the valley, some say you can still feel the love that started with a widow's kindness and a cowboy's generous heart. A love that changed not just 2 lives but generations. A love that proved that sometimes the best Christmas miracles are the ones that last forever. Their children kept the ranch running, honoring the legacy their parents had built. The portrait hung in the parlor, a reminder of where they came from and what love could accomplish. And every Christmas, the family gathered at the ranch and someone always told the story of how it all began. Of the Christmas widow who had no money for her children and the cowboy who played Santa Claus and stayed for life. It was a story of hope and love, of second chances and new beginnings, of family and faith and the power of kindness. It was a story that reminded everyone that even in the darkest times when all seems lost, help can come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, just sometimes, that help comes with love attached, the kind of love that lasts not just for Christmas, but for always and forever. The ranch still stands today, run by the fifth generation of the family that Preston and Beatrice started. The house has been expanded and modernized, but the original structure remains, preserved as a testament to the man who built it with his own hands for the woman who captured his heart. Visitors come sometimes, drawn by the story, wanting to see where the famous Christmas miracle happened. And in the family Bible, kept in a glass case in the parlor, the dates are recorded with care. Benjamin Vance died October 1882. Preston and Beatrice married June 15, 1883. And beneath that, the births of all their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. A family tree that grew from the seed of love planted on a cold Christmas Eve when a widow opened her door to a stranger and found her future waiting on the other side. Their story became more than just family legend. It was written about in local newspapers, turned into a book by one of their great-granddaughters, and eventually became part of Colorado history, an example of the resilience and kindness that characterized the best of the Wild West. Schools taught about them, historians referenced them, and romantics pointed to them as proof that true love really does exist. But for the family, they were simply Grandma B and Grandpa Preston, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They were the reason the family valued kindness and generosity, the reason they believed in second chances, the reason they knew that love could conquer any obstacle. The story of Christmas, 1882, lived on, passed down through the generations, a reminder that the greatest gifts are not the ones wrapped in paper and tied with ribbon. The greatest gifts are the ones that change lives, the ones that bring hope when there is none, the ones that turn strangers into family and desperation into joy. Preston Vaughn had played Santa Claus that Christmas, bringing gifts and food and hope to a widow and her children. But he had given them something far more valuable than any material goods. He had given them himself, his love, his commitment, his life. He had stayed not for a day or a week or a month, but for life, building a family and a legacy that would endure for generations. And Beatrice had given him something just as precious. She had given him purpose, had shown him what love really meant, had made his life worth living. Together, they had created something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy, had built hope from despair, had proven that even in the hardest times, love finds a way. Their story was complete, their love eternal, their legacy secure. The cowboy who played Santa Claus had indeed stayed for life, and the widow who had no money for her children had found riches beyond measure in the form of a love that lasted forever, and a family that spanned generations. It was a perfect ending to a perfect love story, one that started with a thrown horseshoe and a desperate prayer, and grew into something that changed not just 2 lives, but countless lives over the decades. Preston and Beatrice Vaughn had lived and loved and left the world better than they found it, and their story continued to inspire everyone who heard it. The Christmas miracle of 1882 had indeed been a miracle, but not just because a cowboy brought gifts to poor children. The real miracle was the love that blossomed from that act of kindness, the family that grew from that love, and the legacy that continued generation after generation. It was proof that one act of kindness, one moment of compassion, one decision to help someone in need could change everything. And so the story ended where all the best love stories end, with a family gathered together, with love that transcended death, with a legacy that would never be forgotten. Preston had played Santa Claus and stayed for life, and in doing so, he had given Beatrice and her children the greatest gift of all, a future filled with love, hope, and happiness. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, and worth celebrating for all time.